Welcome to the Soul Adventure podcast from ECKANKAR. I'm Doug Kunin, and I'll be your host today. Today we'll be exploring the full spectrum of living, and that includes not only human relationships, but the interactions we have with animals, specifically pets, and how these relationships might have a higher purpose, a divine spiritual purpose, for our spiritual growth, as well as for our pets. What do you think? Could there be a spiritual purpose for the pets in our lives? Every culture and tradition around the world has perspectives on animals and pets. Do they have a spiritual life? Do they have a soul? Do they go to heaven? A starting point for our discussion on this, and also to give a perspective from the ECKANKAR teachings, is this short passage from a book entitled Animals Are Souls Too, by Sri Harold Klemp, the spiritual leader of ECKANKAR. He writes, "Our relationship with animals is often defined by what we most need to learn. Pets can teach us a great many things: patience, flexibility, how to live in the moment, how to laugh at ourselves. But most of all, they can teach us how to give and receive unconditional love." So as our guest today, we have Heather Davari. Heather is no stranger to the show. I've seen you in this studio before.
Hi, Doug. It's great to be here in this chair.
Yes, you are the guest, so I get to ask you questions.
I love it.
And I want to start with a question before you tell us your story. If I can ask you a question.
Ask away.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm wondering. It seems people sometimes have an easier time loving a pet or an animal than the humans in their lives. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's a great question. And I was actually thinking about it this morning in my contemplation,
Really?
if you can believe that, with my kitty cat sitting on my lap. You know, I'm going to tell this story, and it involves a lot of stresses, including spending a lot of money on medical bills for a new kitten. I'm like, wow, would I have done that for a boyfriend?
You know, it triggers the thought that our pets become family members. And, you know, a lot of historical periods and cultures, you know, animals are there to protect, to serve in the fields or whatever. And we have this great blessing. They become a part of our family for which we just give that unconditional love.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
And they give it back to us. And they really don't expect anything in return. I mean,
Expectations.
yes.
I think that's a big obstacle in human relationships is we have so many expectations of the humans in our lives, and what human being can possibly fulfill always someone else's expectations.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's all about expectations. Because if I was dating someone and they went in the hospital and I spent thousands of dollars on them, I would expect them to pay me back. I certainly did not expect my cat to pay me back. So I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay. Well, you've given a few clues to what your story might involve. So why don't we start off here?
Okay.
Share this journey you had with your beloved cat.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to tell the story because it's actually one of my daughter's favorite stories. And she asked me to tell her this at bedtime. I'm going to add some things that I don't normally add at bedtime, but she loves the love in this story. So, Leela, this one's for you. The story really started when I moved to Los Angeles to pursue, you know, my best life. I really was preoccupied with finding my mission. So I moved from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, and basically everything went wrong. And, you know, you can expect some bumps in the roads when you move to a new place, but this kind of went on for 12 years. I would take 5 steps forward, 20 steps back. It just felt like I could not get my footing, and my friends around me were getting married and living their destiny, you know, in my opinion. And I just felt so left behind. And it was a lot of like, oh, what is going on, God? Like, what am I doing wrong? And honestly, I just started to lose my faith in the goodness of life. I'm an optimist, but I'm like, my heart started to close, I would say. And nothing good happens when your heart's closed. The universe had some ideas for me to help me out. So one day I'm sitting in my kitchen and I'm working at home, and I had this super strong nudge, go pet animals.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thought.
Right? It's not an everyday.
Where would you go to pet animals?
Well, luckily, there was a pet store just a couple blocks away from where I lived. I'm like, okay, sure. So I jump in my car, I go to the store. The moment I walk in, there was this teeny little kitten in this big cage. And, she was so cute. And she kind of had these interesting colors and markings that I hadn't seen before, like a tortoiseshell mixed with a tabby. Of course, I had to hold her. And as I was holding this kitten, and the owner was telling me how she came to foster her. And 30 minutes we chatted, and this little kitty just fell asleep in my arms. She had been found under a house, and her brother had been adopted earlier, so she was kind of all alone there in this big cage. Well, I think the owner saw that I was kind of falling for this kitten, so she had said, well, you can take her home for free. I'll give you litter and food and everything you need. I was like, oh, that's so tempting. I really wanted a pet, but I'm like, I don't know if I can afford it, or this is a really good time in my life. So I said, I'll think about it. I ran some errands. Well, as you can guess, I came back. And the moment I walked in the door, that little kitten just started meowing and wouldn't stop until I picked her up. So it felt meant to be. It felt beschert. And so I took her home.
Beschert. Do you want to share with
beschert.
That's a Yiddish term.
I grew up in South Florida, so yeah, that's my Yiddish
what
coming
does it mean?
out. Meant to be.
Meant to be.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, it's like divine destiny, or
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
It was such a great setup. So I was so happy just driving her home in her little box. And I drove her back to I lived in a little studio in Santa Monica, and I let her down in the apartment, and she just ran around like, I'm free, like she had never run before. I don't know how long, she'd been in that cage. And we fell in love, and she gave me this purpose. I had no real depth of awareness at the time, but she was opening my heart. It wasn't the perfect job, it wasn't the perfect boyfriend, but she brought this love into my life that, was missing. And so that was awesome for a couple weeks. And then suddenly she got very, very sick. And she wouldn't eat. That's never a good sign with animals. And I'm thinking, she'll feel better later, and kind of went about my day. But she hid under the bed, and when I came home, I couldn't get her out, and she was very, very limp, like she was unresponsive.
Yeah, that's a scary situation right there.
It was scary. Yeah. And so I kind of let an hour pass. I felt kind of terrified because I'd never seen a cat like that before. I grew up with cats, and I hadn't seen this. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I raced to the nearest veterinarian that was open late. It was Sunday, so I went into the ER. And they said, no, she's running a super high fever, very dangerous, and so we need to keep her. And I was sitting there alone in the waiting room of this veterinarian hospital, and I was just like, felt like all that love just kind of got ripped away from me. I felt so alone and so sad. She would end up staying in that hospital off and on for several weeks. So that was the beginning of what would become a medical nightmare. The doctors could not figure out what was wrong with her. And so she had tubes coming out of her and a little cone, and she had sores, and this poor little kitty was just miserable, and the doctors were quite baffled. And it just tore my heart out. I couldn't take her home. I didn't know if she was going to make it, frankly. And to add insult to injury, the vet bills were insane.
Really?
But I didn't care. I just really was happy to do whatever it took for this kitten. It's that unconditional love.
Yeah.
So this was also the time in my life when I had really been seeking spiritually. As I mentioned, like I just could not get on my feet. I had looked at all different types of religions and Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism. Nothing really clicked for me. And so I had just started studying the teachings of ECKANKAR. And I was loosely practicing these new techniques that I was learning. But, there's nothing like a crisis to encourage one to practice new things. And so I started to put things to the test. And the techniques that I started to put to the test were, one, in ECKANKAR, we looked to a inner spiritual guide called the Mahanta. And so there's a spiritual lineage of ECK masters.
Okay.
And right now, Sri Harold Klemp is serving in that capacity as the living ECK master in the Mahanta. And the Mahanta is the inner part. And this is really cool to me because I hadn't found this in any other teachings.
Which part?
The inner guide. And so now I did have these tools. Right. I'm like, all right, let's see if they work. So the first thing I did was ask the Mahanta for help, my inner spiritual guide. I was like, help, lots of tears, lots of emotion. Yeah. Because it was not a small event in my life. It was like things were hard. And then I had this love, this unconditional love, and then it was ripped away from me. And it just tore my heart out. Mm-hmm. So now I just felt really, really low. And then the other thing is you can chant this spiritually charged word, Hugh, or sing it, just Hugh. So that's what I did. So simple, right?
Yeah. You say spiritually charged word. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Well, Hugh is said to be the sound behind all sounds. It's an ancient name for God. I learned it when I came into ECKANKAR, but I also learned that it's been around forever, and other religions have practiced it as well. So it's a very ancient mantra. Okay. I like to sing it like 20 minutes a day, but I also use it, creatively in all different kinds of ways. In this particular time, I was singing it a lot before I went to bed. I love dreams. I like to remember my dreams and write them down. So I would sing Hugh and use these tools, and then here is what happened. I started to have these dreams. And the first dream it really stood out to me because of the quality of light. And it was in a cave, and Eloise, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you her name.
Oh, Eloise.
Eloise. So,
Eloise was pawing on your inner consciousness.
Oh, my goodness. She certainly was. So, she chose her name, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes. When I brought her home, I was, thinking of names, and none of them kind of clicked. And then it just was like someone told me, Eloise. I'm like, that's a cool name. That's your name. She's like, yeah, that's my name.
That's not a common name.
And it totally fits her, right? Mm-hmm. So Eloise, I saw her in this dream, and she was sitting in this cave. There were no windows, but it was still like light, like a golden light, and it felt very warm. And directly in front of her was a swirling pool of water and light. And I just had this understanding that she was getting a cleansing of some kind. Yeah, pets do have karma, and this illness was kind of like a cleansing for her. So that was one dream I had, and it gave me peace because it was like communication, right? Understanding. It made me calm down and feel that she was in good hands, like it was okay that this was happening. And then I had other dreams too, that I just saw her sitting at my front door in the dream as if she was coming home. Again, like a very special quality of light to that dream. And this happened twice. She appeared at the door twice. I'm like, okay, she's coming home twice. And, I had to write this all down in my dream journal to kind of understand. So, all right, this is very cool. These tools are working. So I'm going to do more of that. Right. And I did. Like when I would visit her at the hospital and her little cone and tubes and everything, I could hold her, and another Ekis would come with me, a very dear friend of mine who loved animals, and we would hold her and Hugh, and she would just fall asleep and be very calm. I was not calm. I was a wreck, because this went on for weeks. Weeks. Yeah. And so, but just like the dream, the doctors would try and send her home. Well, she would come home and she wouldn't do well and have to bring her back to the hospital. That happened twice. So after the second time being in the hospital, they tried everything they could, and they even said they would let me have some of these visits for free because the bill was getting like human bill hospital high.
Right.
And they sent her home a third time. Well, I had to bring her back to the hospital. This time, the doctors decided there was nothing they could do. They said, you know what? We think she's going to die a painful death, and the best thing you can do is euthanize her. Well, that is not what I wanted to hear. And I'm looking at this doctor, one of the best veterinarians in Los Angeles, and I'm thinking, that's not right. More like I was feeling it. It was more like a knowingness. It wasn't like a denial, but it was just like a calmness in my heart. Like, no.
Yeah.
She's still alive. I didn't feel like it was her time. So I told him, all right, I'll think about it. I'll sleep on it. And I did. So I did my hue. I asked for guidance. I didn't have a dream specifically, but I did wake up with this clarity, with this knowingness. And it was go pick her up, get her out of the hospital, and find another vet. So I called the vet. They did not agree, but of course they have to release her. So I'm in the car driving to get Eloise, and I'm maybe second guessing I'm going against the doctor's orders. Is this really wise? And just then I look up, and there's this big billboard, and it says, time for coming home.
Oh.
It was like a hockey promotion or something. It had nothing to do with it, but it was Holy Spirit speaking to me through this billboard. In ECKANKAR, we call that golden tongue wisdom, where somebody says something or you read something and it pops out just for you. And it was confirming what I knew as soul, what I knew to be true. So I'm like, yep, I'm going to go get her. And I did. And I brought her home, and I just kept calling vets until it felt right. And I found a vet that could help her. And that's kind of its own story.
Right.
My mind and spirit are just expanding all over the place, right, during this experience.
Your spiritual IQ was being raised.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. To see these possibilities of how the divine intelligence was speaking to you and validating what you knew already in your heart.
And I love that because, we're born with an IQ, and we have to develop it. Like, we have to develop it to reach our full mental potential. And it's the same thing spiritually. Like, I'm born as soul. In ECKANKAR, we say we are soul. We don't have a soul. And this was also huge for me, especially as a writer, that rocked my world, the semantics, that I am a spark of God. And therefore, I have this birthright, this divine connection with God, but it has to be nurtured. So that's what I was doing. Although it wasn't clear to me at the time, I was doing these spiritual exercises to strengthen myself spiritually, to hear the guidance that's like always coming in. And it came in the form of dreams, it came in the form of this billboard, which was so cool. You couldn't take that knowingness away from me. It was so clear.
It just comes through the ordinary, quote, ordinary fabric of our daily lives.
Yeah.
Yet it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it makes life so much more interesting too.
Absolutely.
Right? Spirit uses every experience to teach us something on multiple levels. And I didn't realize how full this one was until you invited me to come tell the story on this podcast.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I see how she opened my heart so I could receive guidance and receive love. Shortly after this experience, I actually met my husband.
How long ago was this again?
Oh, my.
How many years ago?
12
12
years ago.
years, okay.
Yeah. And he had his own cat. But
And did that cat get along with Eloise?
not for 3 days.
All right.
They get along great now.
Okay, good. Relationships.
Relationships. You're like karma. We have our karma. Our pets have their karma. And so Eloise helped open my heart and gave me a chance to be a vehicle for her. And she was a vehicle for me. It was this beautiful relationship, this give and take.
So help me out here. You went to a different vet. Mm-hmm. What's the next part of the story? What happened for Eloise?
Yeah. The story wasn't over quite yet for her, but at least she was alive and she was home.
Okay.
And, she still looked like a nightmare. She had these terrible sores on her face, but she was happy to be home, I could tell. So, like I said, I called these different vets until something clicked. And so the vet that I ended up going to did Western and Eastern medicine. This is news to me. I had never heard of acupuncture for a pet. And I remember asking, this is a kitten. Is she going to sit still for acupuncture? Oh, yeah, she'll sit still, the doctor assured me. And she did. Oh. She sat still and fell asleep, did my hue. Oh. My friend was there supporting us. And my gosh, that cat got acupuncture. It was like, really, again, more expansion, dropping judgments all over the place. Also, she gave her Chinese herbs, which this was my first experience with Chinese herbs.
That's fun, feeding Chinese herbs to a cat.
Right. You would think that would not happen. And they were pungent.
Yeah.
But somehow this little kitten let me put this pungent herb, I had to mix it with water and put it in a syringe. She let me give it to her. I flipped her on her back and gave her this, and she took it. That was a miracle.
Sometimes they know that what this is going to help them.
She absolutely had to, because believe me, Eloise is no shrinking violet. So she started looking better the next day. And a few weeks later, she was healthy, happy, and wreaking havoc on my houseplants. I mean, it was a full recovery. And I'm happy to report Eloise is still a dear and healthy member of our family today. So it really showed me that do not limit yourself. I mean, ever, right? But healing can come from anywhere. So I think that doctor was just being a vehicle for Eloise. You know, it could have been anybody, but it happened to be this vet, which in turn expanded my consciousness about Chinese herbs and acupuncture. Yeah, so many spiritual opportunities, Doug.
So you've talked about a few techniques, the hue and dreams and going in for inner guidance. And of course, ECKANKAR recognizes an individual can and should go inwardly for whatever connection makes their heart open. If it opens you to more divine love, that is the open doorway. So many resources to explore and to share and to experience. And ECKANKAR says, test it out for yourself. If it works, great. If not, that's fine too. Mm-hmm. Find whatever works for you. You've got a short audio clip that kind of brings us back to square one, or to the center point of it all. And so now we'll hear from Sri Harold Klemp, the Mahanta, the living Eckmaster.
Sometimes the richest people on earth are those who have love, and shouldn't just say sometimes, I will say always. The richest people on earth are those who have love, God's love. And if you're in a family and you have animals or so on, sometimes the animals are capable of giving more of God's love than other humans of your acquaintance are. I know we find this sometimes a little bit hard to believe, but it's so.
Can I just say something
Sure,
about
go
that
ahead.
quote?
Go ahead.
Because I think it does get to the heart of everything, even animals, and the reason for animals and the reason for just living it's just all about that divine, unconditional love. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Heather. This has been an incredible journey. Well, before we conclude this episode, Heather, do you want to add anything else?
I do, actually.
Okay.
I have to talk about the Free Hue app really quick, right?
Okay. Feel free to take the host mic back.
Okay. So I love the Free Hue app. ECKANKAR has this beautiful free application on your phone. Download it, and it has thousands of people singing hue, and it's a 20-minute loop, but it also has a beautiful video, more information about the hue. It's such a boon. And I know that people, especially right now in the world, really could use a little help. So if it speaks to you, that app is my favorite thing. I use it every day.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate your stepping in there. Thank you for sharing from your heart. Well, thank you, everyone out there. Thanks for joining us on the Soul Adventure podcast from ECKANKAR. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.